This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
So, the practice squad, the throwback, episode 4, and I think this set of games was actually a little bit more interesting than I expected. You know, we came off the high of last week, looking at the Chicago game and the San Francisco game. But this week, we saw the Lions, I don't have my scores in front of me, Stroz, but the Lions lost to the Falcons in week 7, and then took down the Broncos in a blowout in week 8, taking them to 6-2 on the year. I think I've started every single game. I kind of want to hear, what were your earliest impressions of Game 7 versus Atlanta?
I was kind of blown away at how much they missed Javid Best. And as we were coming out of the
we
San
anticipated
Francisco,
that.
No, we did, but as we came out of the San Francisco game, you could tell that they were missing him in that final drive, in that last quarter. You could tell they were missing him. In Game 7 of the Falcons game, they were missing him wholeheartedly. And it seemed like the coaching staff made a concerted effort to try to run the ball, especially early. I really felt like that first half, they were handing it off a ton and trying to establish the run or get something out of that run game. And it didn't really materialize. You know, you had Maurice Morris as your lead back in this game, and it just never really came to fruition. And they weren't really using any of the screen passes or any of the bubble plays. It legitimately was, we're going to kind of switch our offense. We're going to become a power run team, which I think in this game was a total mistake, because looking at the stats, Atlanta, going back to 2011, that Atlanta team, that Atlanta defense was very, very good against the run. They finished, in my notes here, I believe it was 6th best versus the run.
I actually thought they did decent on the ground. Maurice Morris, 9 carries, 50 yards. Keelan Williams, 9 carries, 44 yards. In fact, I think you could make a case on the ground they were better than they had been with Javid Best. But what hurt was the short passing game. You know, Javid Best was routinely making plays after the catch. No running back. I'm sorry. Maurice Morris had 2 receptions for 13 yards. That's all they got out of the running backs. I tweeted earlier in the week, occasionally I'll tweet like big thoughts, that I get from watching these games. As I watched this game against the Falcons, week 7, so we still got a long way to go, I was willing to go as far as to say Stafford was not a good quarterback in 2011. I don't think he was a bad quarterback. I think he was somewhere between, honestly, below average to average. And I want to say this, you look at his numbers and they tell you he was incredible. But do you know who it really reminds me of? If you didn't see the tweet, I actually think Stafford's 2011 was very similar to what Sam Darnold did last year. Now, Stafford's numbers were way better, but so was his offense. Calvin Johnson, obviously miles above anything that Sam Darnold had to work with. I mean, I guess Le'Veon Bell is good, but he's a running back, and we know about them. I think Nate Burleson was probably better than any receiver that Sam Darnold had to work with. But I thought what we saw is a quarterback who showed legitimate flashes of being special. Multiple times. I'd say in every game he showed flashes of being special. But the theme of the season was growing pains. I thought this was, I've said this a lot. I've bashed on Stafford a lot. Stafford was sub 50% completion percentage in this one. Mm-hmm. He didn't turn the ball over, but I thought he was very underwhelming. And we've talked, one theme of the whole podcast so far is that Calvin Johnson is probably better than you remember him. I think if in 2011, which is, you're talking 25, 26-year-old Calvin Johnson, like the absolute prime of his career. If Calvin Johnson had prime Matthew Stafford in 2011, I think he might have broken every receiving record ever set for a season. I mean, he missed at least one in this game. It might have been more. I don't know if we've had a game yet where Stafford misses a throw or doesn't miss a throw to Calvin with nobody behind him. Like, the amount of times that Calvin had nobody to beat and Stafford missed it, or maybe he completed it but he underthrew it, it's absurd. Like, he's already, I believe, through 7 games, he's at 10 touchdowns. And despite that, he should probably have 5 more. Like, I don't even think I'm exaggerating. I mean, where are you at on that? Because I think that's genuine. I think Calvin through 7 games and 10 touchdowns should have 5 more.
No, you're absolutely right. The thing that is interesting for me, and this is what I'm watching when I'm watching these games, is Kelvin Johnson's body language. And, you know, the thing when he retired, right, this guy basically gave it all every single week that he played. And he ended up retiring with bent fingers that will never work right. He said he was tired of putting his body on the line. He said he was tired of getting beat up. And watching these games, I watch Aaron throw. I watch him get thrown into tackles or into coverage. I'm watching him get beat up at the expense of Matthew Stafford learning his position. So no, I think you're absolutely spot on. He could probably have another 5 more touchdowns.
There are times Stafford throws such beautiful passes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think he threw one, he got let down by Brandon Pettigrew. It was a 7-point game with about a minute and a half left. The Lions have the ball and all 3 timeouts.
Yep.
4th and 10.
Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, 4th and 10, maybe about the 50-yard line. Stafford escapes to his left to buy time, completes a dime to Brandon Pettigrew at the first down mark, and Brandon Pettigrew drops it, and that's basically the game at that point.
Yep.
I mean, that was an incredible play. He escaped. You can't stress how hard it is to throw across your body in the NFL. Mm-hmm. This is a 23, I believe, year old Matthew Stafford who got to his left and just a dime. And like, he has those moments all throughout the season. The problem is he also has moments where he's just rough. And I'm just pulled up his full season stats. Kelvin, in a year where we're saying was missed routinely, put up 1,681 yards, good for best in the NFL, and 16 touchdowns. I think he could have put up 25 this year. Not yet, so maybe I'm pushing it, but I'm currently saying he's missed 5. That gives him 21. Like, I'm sorry, I can't get over it. Like, I wasn't ready for this theme because you know I like Stafford. And I texted some friends about it as well. And I might be digging a little too deep into this. So sorry if this podcast goes long. It's become a theme lately. A friend who I texted about it said, you were so high on Stafford in 2011. Through 7 games, I don't think I was wrong to be high on Stafford in 2011. I think what we saw is Matthew Stafford has the ability to make throws that very few guys in the league can make. He makes them quite often, but he also makes a lot of mistakes.
I think the one thing that you're seeing with Matt Stafford as the season starts to unfold is you're seeing why they start referring to him as a gunslinger, right? Because he has these miraculous moments where he essentially makes something out of thin air, or he has a beautiful pass that you're just like, wow, only a few guys in the league can make that type of throw. And then there are moments where you're like, what are you throwing into triple coverage for? You know, why not take the dump off pass, or why not try to find a safer play, or just get rid of the damn ball? Why are you holding on to it for so damn long? So you're starting to see a little bit of that gunslinger mentality. And I think this is the season where he gets that moniker, because that's essentially the one way up until recent that everybody referred to Matt Stafford. He's a gunslinger.
We talked about some of the problems with that. That was actually in this game particularly. I thought he's been really good in the short to mid-range game most of the season. This game, I thought he was terrible everywhere. This is probably one of the worst games. It's definitely the worst game of the season for him. I think it's probably, you could look back and call it one of the worst games of his career.
He didn't look good. That's for damn sure. He struggled a lot in this game.
On the other side of the ball, I have a couple comments as well. One note, the Falcons kept getting behind the defense, kind of like I was talking about Calvin getting behind the defense. There were a lot of big plays in this game. And I think I won't get too deep into it. We start to see big plays really become a theme, in game 8 as well, even though they win. One thing that I don't remember, there were still at least 3 false starts. There was a back-to-back false starts. The crowd was clearly still a factor despite the loss to San Francisco the previous week.
No, absolutely. That's the one thing I took out of it. Like that first, I have it in my notes. I have the crowd noise was clearly in effect for that first defensive possession for the Lions, caused a false start. It seemed like Matt Ryan was uncomfortable through the beginning half of this game. It seemed like he settled down later on, but he was obviously uncomfortable. So no, the crowd was absolutely into this, and the crowd was there still feeding off of that Chicago game. Absolutely.
One thing that I think we have to get into in this game, I couldn't believe it. I had to go, I don't know if you do this. After I finish every game, I go and look at the stats.
Mm-hmm.
Cause we're watching them for the most part in 45-minute condensed versions. So we're seeing everything, but it's a little harder to digest. I thought the Lions were going to have way more penalty yards than the Falcons. And they actually didn't. It was really close. But the timing of these penalties, here's the thing. I have it written in my notes. I actually think the Lions are the more talented team in this game. They lost. And I think they deserved to lose. But the game that I watched was the Lions being a better team, but beating themselves with poorly timed penalties, getting beat on big plays. I want to say, I believe there were at least 2 drives where a penalty extended a drive for the Falcons and led to points. And the thing was, they came in big moments. With 9 minutes left, up by 4, Atlanta gets stopped at the 50-yard line. Drive is extended by a penalty. They go on to get a field goal to push the lead from 4 to 7. The Lions picked up a first down on a 3rd and long with about 5 minutes left. That got called back on a holding. And just like such crucial moment penalties. This is, the Jim Schwartz team was known for not being disciplined. I think this is a game they lost because of a lack of discipline. And speaking of a lack of discipline, I think it extended the other areas of the game. I thought the tackling was awful in this game. I do remember having an issue with some of the 2011 tackling. I didn't think it showed up until this game. In fact, the Lions, when they turned it over on 4th and 10 with a minute and a half left, they still had 3 timeouts. Stopped them on first down, stopped them on second down. On 3rd down, they hit Jacquizz Rodgers 4 or 5 yards before the first down, but couldn't bring him down. Jacquizz Rodgers, I don't know if you remember him, not a power back.
He was like 175 pounds soaking wet.
He powered his way to the first down.
There were 3 missed tackles on that one play.
And this might have been more of a theme in the next game. I don't recall entirely, but I thought we saw it in both. The Falcons continued to build on what the Bears did, but I think they took it a step further. We didn't see the trap plays where the guard, takes advantage of a tackle who's pushing the quarterback. We didn't see as much of that, but we saw a lot of is a lot of draws, most runs on play action, and I think we saw the Falcons basically take advantage of a Lions team that overreacted to what they saw early. And there was a big touchdown, a big meaning deep. There was a deep touchdown in this game where they were going to draw, so the safety stayed back. The linebackers were all blocked, and the defensive line was all coming after the passer. And Michael Turner ran untouched like 40 yards before Louis Delmas caught up to him. And again, that's discipline to an extent. They're overplaying what they see.
Yeah, that was in my notes. I've got this team is undisciplined. Defense is very aggressive, leading to lots of penalties. And you're right. It wasn't so much that, because I was surprised at the actual number of penalties too. I went back and I looked at the stats just like you did, and I thought for sure that the Lions were going to eclipse the Falcons by penalties, and it was not even going to be close.
No.
And it was essentially neck and neck. It was just the time of the penalties. It was when they came in drives, and it was kind of appalling because the Lions would have a nice play that would help move the chains on the 3rd down, and then they would get a penalty, and now they're backed up 5 yards. Or they would stop Atlanta on the 3rd down, and Atlanta was going to be forced to punt, but no, hold on. There's either a face mask or there's some type of a rough, and next thing you know, they're getting an automatic first down and moving the ball 10 yards down the field. It was mind-blowing in this game. The inability to complete or execute on 3rd downs without either shooting yourself in the foot or just having a bad play or a ball dropped was frustrating at the highest level. I mean, you had to settle. The points came field goal, and now we're into the 3rd quarter. That's how they scored their first 9 points.
Yeah. Well, I thought, again, as been something we've seen with every game, they looked a lot better in the second half than the first half. I didn't really think they looked great in the second half in this one either. That's why I think the Lions were the better team. I think the Lions played pretty poorly, and at the end of the day, they were moving with a real chance to tie the game up late in the 4th. And when you're clearly playing a bad game and you stay close like that, I think it says a lot about who the better team is. I only have one. Go ahead.
I really thought the offense came alive in that 3rd quarter, and that was because they started to throw the ball more. They were behind at that point. I think it was like 20-9, so you had no other choice. And then you hit Kelvin for that big play.
I do have a note. I thought that throw in a game that was one of the worst of the season, one of the worst of the career for Stafford. I do have a note. 3rd quarter touchdown was a beautiful strong arm in a tight window, and then Kelvin takes off. It wasn't, now that was a beautiful play by both sides because Kelvin didn't have much space. He had a step on his man. Stafford bulleted it, which there's been talk over the years if that's been an issue that he throws it too hard. And I think for some receivers it probably is. It wasn't for Kelvin. He had to bullet that one. Kelvin gets it in full perfect stride. And Kelvin, again, you forget because he was so big and he was, we watched him at the end of his career. Kelvin at this time had elite running back speed.
He was so fast.
He had elite running back speed. So if he catches it in stride, he's a tough guy to catch up with. And it was just over. Like it never looked like anyone had a chance to get him. That was a beautiful play. I think the offense, I looked up the standings because I don't remember what Atlanta was.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, after watching this game, when I watched this, I was like, I'm going to see that Atlanta only won like 4 or 5 games this year because I absolutely thought the Lions, I thought they played a terrible game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought in the second half they looked which was better than they looked in the first half, and they still stayed in this game. The Falcons actually were a 10-6 team. I believe they actually made the playoffs that year as well. So I was wrong. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I didn't think at any point in the game the offense really got going.
No, it never really did. Never really got out of the boots. That play specifically about Calvin Johnson, after he kind of shakes his man, because one guy has a chance to make a tackle and to kind of pull him down with a hand, Calvin shakes him off like nobody's business. And next thing you know, there's nobody in the shot but Calvin. Calvin ran away from everyone.
Literally, what I said, it didn't even look like anyone was close. That's exactly what I was thinking, is there's nobody else on the field. And it was a tight window throw. The only other note that I have on this game before I get into studs and duds, and of course if you have any, go ahead and let me know. I remember thinking as 2011 went on that Stephon Logan was underwhelming. He had a great 2010. I was looking back at the stats. He was very good 2010. But I've never been a fan of keeping a guy on your roster as just a kick returner unless he's an elite kick returner. And Stephon Logan didn't really touch the field otherwise. I think he actually had a run in this game. He did not have a run in this game. Maybe it was the next game. But I'm starting to feel it. We haven't really seen him break big returns yet. And he had a massive fumble on a kick return that put Atlanta inside the 20. It was just this game, if I was to use a phrase to describe this game,
game, Logan had 2 fumbles, lost that one. But yeah, he did not have.
I didn't entirely blame him for the second one. The second one, he ran into an offensive lineman. You want to have more awareness, but that's a more understandable situation. And I think there's some level of shared blame on the lineman as well. But if I were to summarize this whole game with a phrase, it would be lack of discipline. Bad fumbles, bad penalties, crucial drops, not finishing tackles. This is a game the Lions absolutely should have won. And I don't think, the only other game they've lost so far was to San Francisco. They could have won that game, but I definitely wouldn't say they should have. The Lions were a better team than the Atlanta Falcons, and they just didn't show up to play on this day.
I totally agree with you. This was a game where it didn't seem like the Atlanta offense really had anything going, and yet they were able to put points up on the board. I thought the Detroit Lions offensive line in this game was absolutely abysmal. This is where that theme of Detroit never having an offensive line comes into play. I thought the defense was a little bit too aggressive and took too many stupid penalties, which allowed Atlanta to capitalize on third downs where Detroit had already stopped them. This was a game where Detroit should have came out the victor, but due to their own incompetence, whether it be on the coaching staff or whether it be on the guys on the field, they blew this game. They blew this game wholeheartedly.
I think I actually had more notes on this game than any game yet. I thought it was, it just had more notable moments. And it's funny because the next one, it was basically only a half a football. But we'll get to that in a moment.
It's weird because the next one I probably have the least amount of notes for any game that we.
There was a moment where, I don't want to get too far into it. There was a moment in the next game where Shaun Hill came in the third quarter. I don't know if Stafford had a minor injury. And I was like, wait, is Stafford done for the game? Do I even have to watch the rest of this? But to wrap up game 7, the loss to the Atlanta Falcons at home, who was your dud?
My dud was the entire coaching staff. I felt like the coaching staff put this team in a hole early. Like I said, I thought they came out and they tried to establish the run where at this time in 2011, this was a team that was predicated on passing first, using the pass to set up the run, not utilizing the bubble screens, trying to go a little bit more power, which was not this team's MO at the time. I thought the coaching staff did a really, really poor job. And then not figuring out that you need to pass the ball on this Falcons defense until midway through that third quarter. To me, this entire loss was on the coaching staff.
It's funny because given that I said the theme of this was a lack of discipline, that should be my obvious answer. And I didn't even consider it. In fact, my dud was really easy, and it was for very few things that happened. And it was actually Brandon Pettigrew. And the reason that he's my dud is because he's been my stud quite a bit throughout this. I think Brandon Pettigrew has been such an underrated, looking back on 2011, piece of that offense. He was so crucial because Stafford was great in the short to mid-range throw. He was great in the middle of the field. And that's where Brandon Pettigrew comes into play. And he's had his drops throughout the season to this point. But in a game where Stafford lost essentially his other security blanket and Javid Best, Brandon Pettigrew had an opportunity. I don't know how you felt. You know how on some drives, late in the game, fourth quarter comeback territory, right? You can just feel things working right.
Mm-hmm.
Despite it being a 4th and 10, that drive had felt like it was moving. I want to say they were around the 50. And when Stafford escapes to the left and he hits that pass, like you can just feel the momentum coming. The Lions are going to tie this game up in overtime. They've been playing better in the second half. They have a quarterback who has flashed in crucial moments. Like, I think he catches that ball. Things could have ended up different. Now, they had to go another 35 yards or so, but that was a drop that you just can't have. Like, it's a moment. I think it's a defining moment for a guy like Brandon Pettigrew, who we weren't talking about having major drop issues in 2011, but when you look back on his career, that's what you talk about. And I think a game like this and a drop like that are why. He has done so much good to this point. That was such a major letdown. And it was really only one play.
You're absolutely right, because when I was watching this game, without knowing the score, I'm like, I feel like they're going to go in and score here. But I'm like, I look back at the score and I'm like, no, they don't. This game's essentially over. I think Atlanta's going to come down and kick a field goal.
Yeah, I had the same feel. It's the first time where my feelings of what was going to happen didn't match what I knew the results were. It felt like the Lions were going to drive to score. And the lack of discipline was a far bigger issue than Brandon Pettigrew. But I think this is it's not the career defining play by any means, but it is part of a package of plays that defined Brandon Pettigrew's career.
Hold on, before we go to studs, this will kind of segue and transition into my stud. I remember at this point, Calvin Johnson, it felt like there was a lot of conversation about Calvin Johnson being used as a decoy. And I think in this game specifically, when they needed a go-to play, you've seen them go and lean heavily on Brandon Pettigrew. And that note came at that exact moment that we were just talking about, that 4th down, that 4th and 10. Why would you not go to Calvin Johnson? I watched that play unfold.
The broadcast said that. The broadcast said the Lions better be prepared to throw it somewhere else because the Falcons will not let Calvin Johnson get this ball.
Right, but I remember watching that play unfold, and I felt like Calvin Johnson had a window where he was open. And if you could just get him the ball, he was going to be able to make a play. Now the thing is, I went back and again looked at the stats. Calvin Johnson was targeted 11 times in this game. So, he was not being used as a decoy.
And he had 115 yards and a touchdown. It's not like he wasn't a key part of the game. No, in fact, he had 115 yards. The next leading receiver was Pettigrew with 30.
Yes. No, exactly. So he was getting his touches. He was getting his targets. To me, it felt like he should have been a bigger part of that offense, especially in crunch time. And for some reason, it just wasn't there. For my stud, I have Calvin Johnson, I guess. This was a game where I was really frustrated watching this game, and all of those Lions frustrations really kind of came out. And Calvin Johnson had that one magnificent play where he broke away, and he was the only guy in the picture as Stafford squeezed the ball into a tight window, and he shook off a couple defenders. But for the most part, I felt like Calvin Johnson was either underutilized or being targeted 11 times and only catching 5 of them. What's going on here?
So I don't have a whole lot of notes on as to why, but I actually have Calvin Johnson as my easy stud. And it's probably because defensively I wasn't excited by anybody. I thought everyone on defense sucked. Mm-hmm. Matthew Stafford, I just told you, he was a dud candidate. One of the worst games of the season. None of the other receivers showed up. When I say none of the other receivers showed up, I mean Nate Burleson had 1 reception for 1 yard. Yeah. Tony Scheffler had 2 receptions for 15. Maurice Morris, he's a running back, but 2 for 13. Will Heller 1 for 8. There's no other receivers on the box score. Calvin Johnson had 11 targets and 5 catches. I don't think that was on Calvin Johnson. Matthew Stafford was terrible.
Well, Matt Stafford did not help. But the thing that something else that I think you take out of this game specifically, is you didn't get a lot of use from Nate Burleson in this game. He only touched the ball, I think, 3 times. I think he was in all targeted maybe 5.
Well, and we speculated, because we remember him being better than he's been to this point in the season, that Nate Burleson was part of the reaction to losing Javid Best, but this game it certainly didn't feel that way.
Well, no, but I think you started to see some of the groundwork for that. They started to work in a couple end arounds with Nate Burleson. He was only thrown 2-3 times. I think he only caught one. But I feel like he was underutilized, but what you were starting to see was them trying to test different things out to get him involved in that short passing game to pick up that slack that Javid Best kind of left behind.
All right, moving forward, Game 8, 45-10 win over the Broncos on the road. Just going back and from what I remember and what I think, after a 5-0 start, going 1-2 in the next 3 games, I remember going into this Denver game, people were starting to question if the Lions were actually as good as their record. And this was a very emotional win in that they answered the question emphatically. Actually, I'm sorry. It was after starting 5-0, they went 0-2. They lost the next 2 games. And I've said I don't think the Lions were ever real contenders in 2011 now with the watchback, but they were a 10-6 team. And this game answered that. It was a blowout really from the get-go. Denver scored 3 points right off the board. And then Detroit scored the next, was it 38? Or was it 45? I think it might have been 45 straight points after Denver started with 3.
No. It was 30. I think it was 30. It might have been. No, it was 45. Yeah, it was 45 unanswered, and then late in the fourth
Denver
quarter.
Came back and scored.
Yep, they scored a touchdown with Eric Decker.
So it was just such a overwhelming blitz that a lot of the game didn't matter. I will say, after all the bashing that I did on Stafford in the last game, I think this was probably the best game of the season for Stafford. He was able to complete 21 of his 30 passes for 270 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He might have missed a deep ball. I can't remember entirely, but it's believable. For the most part, I thought he was pretty accurate all game long. And if you remember, this was a Denver team that they weren't good, but what they did well was defense. They didn't give up 45 points. And to be fair, the Lions defense scored, twice in this game? So not all 45 coming from the offense, but I thought Stafford rebounded really well. And like I talked about, there were moments of him being special and reason to be excited. Bouncing back from such a bad game against the Falcons the way he did in Denver was very meaningful.
Yeah, this game right here was, it was, I don't want to say it was eye-opening because going back and looking at the Denver Broncos roster, you're kind of like, okay. But this was a team that answered the bell. This was a team that lost back-to-back games. They lost back-to-back games at home. So now they have to go on the road, and Mile High is never an easy place to win. And this team came out and started rolling immediately. This team looked good from the get-go. Stafford, probably his most complete game to this point in the season. And defensively, probably the most complete game.
I don't even remember 9 incompletions. I thought Stafford was close to perfect.
There were, the thing is, I think there were a couple drops. There was one to Titus Young that hit Titus Young right in the chest, and he dropped it. Look,
speaking of Titus Young, by the way, Titus Young did score a touchdown in this game, did have 65 yards, and I think he reminded me how fun he was to watch. This team had such a chance to be so fun because Titus Young was a speed demon, and Javid Best was a speed demon. And you know who makes me think of speed demons? Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not telling you that's who this team was, but this team really had a build. It's hard to watch this team and not give a lot of credit to Martin Mayhew for what he put together.
This team played fast, and they were fast.
And Titus Young had a touchdown where I don't even know where the defense was. I think they literally lost him. He was standing in the end zone, and there was nobody else at the 5-yard line or closer. It was, I don't even think it was a 41-yarder, so it was deeper than I was thinking. But watching this game specifically that play, made me miss Titus Young.
Yeah, it was, this was a good game, man. This was fun to watch. Like you said, it was, by halftime, you could almost shut it off, but this was a team, like I was saying, that answered the bell because we had a whole bunch of question marks about them. They started hot. Were they going to be a flash in the pan? And they showed up in this game. And I think something to kind of look at this point, they're now 4-0 on the road. Their 2 losses came at home. So you go on the road and you're perfect. That says a lot about a team. And it says a lot about a team the way they play, because going on the road is no easy task. And I just feel like this team, they showed up. There was questions being lobbed at this team. And I think after after everything that happened with Handshake Gate and everything that happened with the game against Atlanta, this team came rolling in here on a mission, and they annihilated the Denver Broncos.
Now, I do want to address something you started to bring up but didn't get too into it. You thought the defense played a complete game, right?
Yes.
I thought the defense was fine, good. I think what happened is Jim Schwartz deserves credit for abusing what the Broncos didn't do well. And they already had a good pass rush defensive line. They were already a blitz-heavy team. And Tim Tebow, as much as I love him, very big Tim Tebow fan, wasn't a good NFL quarterback. And what he did the worst...
He was awful.
What he did the worst was it took him forever to release the ball.
Dude,
and so they abused that.
Hold on. So in my notes, I have Tebow has the most exaggerated throwing motion ever.
It takes so long. And I remember it taking long back in 2011, but oh my God, speaking of Calvin Johnson's better than you remember. There is no way that you remember how long it takes Tim Tebow to throw a football.
Dude, you need to go watch it.
I watched cornerbacks react. I'm not even kidding. On the one interception he threw, I watched, I believe it was Eric Wright, so safety. I watched Eric Wright see the start of the arm motion and just jump her out. Mm-hmm. And by the time the ball was released, Eric Wright was the one in position. By the time the ball was released, it looked like it was a throw to Eric Wright.
Yeah.
And so the Lions abused that. I don't actually think the defense was special in this one, especially when you look at the ground. Now, they ran the ball 30 times because Tim Tebow ran the ball 10 times, so that's a part of it. Mm-hmm. But this game really showed how extensively the Lions defense, it wasn't necessarily a bad run defense all the time. I think it's all about the game situation. In fact, I'd go so far as to say when the Lions defense knew what was coming, they were elite. We questioned early on. I think on episode 1, we questioned how good this defense was because we didn't remember them being this good. I think this was the answer, is when the defense knew what was coming, they were going to beat the hell out of you because they had really good pass rushers. And if they knew it was a running play, the defensive line was pretty good at stopping that too. 3rd and 1 situations, the Lions were pretty good at stopping the run.
They were fantastic. Goal line 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, they were fantastic.
But if he didn't know what was coming, they got beat on big plays because they were so extreme at reacting. Who the hell is Lance Ball, and why did he run for 60 yards on 6 carries? I thought it was Monty Ball, and the announcer was saying the name wrong until I looked it up. I had to look it up. I was like, no, that's not Lance Ball. That's Monty Ball. No, it was Lance Ball. He rushed for 60 yards. No, Sean Marino, 14 carries, 70 yards. Tim Tebow, 10 carries, 60 yards. It was a 195-yard rushing day. But more than anything, they came on chunks.
Yeah.
And I thought it really showed, because we started to see that in the Atlanta game. I mentioned that. But I thought it really started to show, they mentioned in this game, the Lions had the 28th ranked run defense.
Yeah, I was going to say, going into this game, they were the 28th ranked run defense.
And I don't think it was based on average carry. It was all about the big play.
Yeah, so Denver did take advantage of that. And Lance Ball took probably the most advantage of it with a massive run for 34 yards. Okay, so yeah, they were gashing them. But overall, the defense did respond. And you're right. This is probably more to do with who they played and what happened.
It was a case of defensive strengths meet offensive weaknesses.
Probably. You're probably right. You're probably absolutely right. But all that being said, the players still had to execute. So I thought the defense did a fantastic job in this game by hitting the quarterback repeatedly, by forcing turnovers, by being in the right spot at the right time. And look, we talked about some of the troubles they had with the run game, especially early in this game. It all ended up getting figured out, and that was because of game situation. When you're down by 35 points, you gotta throw the ball. So, I get that, but that defense helped put them in that spot at the same time.
Now, I actually only have one more note because this game was such a blowout early that there was not a lot to take out of late in the game. And this podcast in a lot of ways is a love affair for Calvin Johnson. the touchdown that he scored, 6 receptions, 125 yards, and a touchdown. The touchdown he scored, he was, again, behind the defense. And this time, because Stafford was on, he hit him. He slowed down on the way to the end zone in a way that I think was a celebration, something he didn't do often.
Yes.
But it was unbelievable. Calvin Johnson at a slowed down celebration speed, it's still outrunning guys.
No, you're spot on, because I was like, oh, Calvin's showboating a little bit, and I'm like, he's still picking up and putting them down.
How tall is he?
Calvin, I think he's like 6'5".
6'5", yeah. 6'5", 240 pounds. People like that are not supposed to move at his speed. I just, the more I watch this, like, it's funny, because back when he played, I would argue he was with, I would argue he was better than anyone that ever played the game. I argued he was the best ever. I was obviously willing to listen if you said Jerry Rice or Randy Moss. And as time's gone on, I found myself putting him at 3 behind those two. But when you go back and watch it, and you compare who he had to play with for the prime of his career, Stafford was good, but Stafford, like you said, he had to deal with the growing pains and the learning of Matthew Stafford. I don't know, man. If Stafford got the luxury of playing with, Calvin got the luxury of playing with an elite quarterback for his career, I don't know that we wouldn't be sitting here and saying he's far and away the best player of all time. His physical attributes, he had fumbling issues and late in his career started to have some drop issues as well, but his athleticism in the prime of his career, let me put it this way, his career doesn't match Jerry Rice, probably doesn't match Randy Moss, but his ability at the peak, at the prime of his career, nobody could have done what this guy could do. It was just, like, he's LeBron James of a football player. And I know people said that about Gronk. The speed of this guy is just not fair.
Yeah, he's a genetic freak show for sure. I agree with you 110%. Watching him in his prime is different than watching him, what we got, or probably how you remember him at the tail end of his career. And you're absolutely right. If he could have had an elite quarterback, or somebody who could just do it a little bit better than Matt Stafford at this point in his career, it'd be mind-blowing to see what his numbers were. Matt Stafford ended up having the 5,000-yard season, and him and Calvin clicked. Like, who do you think the bulk of those yards went? It went to Calvin. You know what I'm saying? Like, Calvin Johnson at a point eclipses Jerry Rice's single season reception.
Following season.
In 2012. So
2012 he puts I didn't know if it was reception. I know in 2012 he put up the yardage record at 1964. Yes. Probably the reception record as well because he had 122 catches.
I mean, it's nuts, and Matt Stafford, legitimately, he's not, at this point, the argument is Matt Stafford a top 15 quarterback, or is Matt Stafford a bottom 15 quarterback? That's kind of where this argument was, because he had all the intangibles, right? He had the arm strength. He had the ability to ad-lib. He had the ability to throw at different angles. The thing was, he would have those moments where he would self-destruct. And you weren't really sure what Matt Stafford you were going to get. And that's kind of where you were right here. Now imagine if you have Calvin Johnson, prime of his career, with a guy like
Stafford even.
Exactly. No, exactly. Prime Stafford, or even, you go Drew Brees at this time, or you can go any other quarterback who you considered elite at this moment in time in 2011. It would be absolutely nuts. A few of the notes that I have going, just kind of to go through this game real quick. It was good to see a sober Matt Prater putting in work.
It was funny to see that.
Matt Prater, that's the whole reason he ended up getting released by Denver, was because he was a drunk. Got his life turned around and made his way to the Lions, which is awesome. Something else I took out of this game. The Lions play action and their fake handoffs are crazy efficient. Like, so good that the cameramen get faked out. And you'll see it a couple times in, I thought it was just something that happened during the Atlanta game, but you see it here again in the Denver game where the cameraman is trying to follow the running back. And next thing you know, Matt Stafford pulls the ball out of thin air and throws it downfield. So I thought that was something that was an interesting takeaway from this game, because the way this offense works was a lot of play action. It was a lot of faking the handoffs. It was a lot of lining up in a draw and not giving the ball to the running back.
It should be mentioned, Stafford had a run for 21 yards. The next longest run of the day was by 12 yards. It was of 12 yards by Maurice Morris.
Yep. And that's just because everybody would follow whoever they thought had the ball. So whether that's the defense not being a very good defense in following, or whether it be just the camouflage that this Detroit Lions offense was able to provide to either spring running backs or to open up plays or to allow Matt Stafford more time with the ball. It worked glowingly. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Any other notes before we get to the stud and dud of the game?
Nope, let's go to studs and duds.
Okay, so I'm going to start with dud, and it's hard to find one in a game you win 45-10.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't even realize this when I wrote down Brandon Pettigrew as a dud in previous week. But Brandon Pettigrew had, I think, maybe the first game where he was kind of not not heard from. 3 receptions for 8 yards total after being such a key part of the offense. You talk about Stafford rebounding after that rough Atlanta game, and you get the exact opposite here out of Brandon Pettigrew. And some of it might not even be on him. You know, Calvin Johnson had 6 catches, Titus Young 4, Nate Burleson 4. But, you know, I mentioned earlier on, I remember this being a 2 tight end offense. Tony Scheffler being a little bit more involved, 3 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown. Brandon Pettigrew, such a key part of the offense up until this game, nowhere to be seen. I'll give him a little slack in that I have no idea where you're going to go. It's very hard to find a dud in this game. So I'll give him that benefit of mentioning that. But other than that, I just, underwhelming day by Brandon Pettigrew.
Yeah, I had struggled to find a dud as well, and I'm going to second Brandon Pettigrew because it really felt like there was a point in this game where they just said, screw it, we'll go to Tony Scheffler. You know, and Scheffler only had 3 targets in this game, but it felt like Tony Scheffler at this point is now emerging as kind of that go-to guy. Yeah.
I don't know if I go so far as go-to guy. We'll see. I think Pettigrew is still the primary tight end, but I do think Scheffler starts to make a little bit more appearances. The one thing he's done, that we've noticed throughout the years, he's not as involved in the offense play to play, but he's showed up in the end zone a few times.
Oh, it seems like at least once a game, whenever they're focusing on getting him the ball, there he's a key component of the game plan. He's scoring a touchdown, and he doesn't have an issue with the drops. The guy is very clutch.
Much more reliable.
What I've taken out of 8 games so far is he's very clutch. Just about any time Stafford throws him the ball, he is making a play and no drops. Whereas with Brandon Pettigrew, last game we talked about it, he had a couple monster drops in that game.
And who's your stud?
So I feel bad because I didn't single anybody out again.
I had a feeling you were going to go defense.
Yeah, this week it's back-to-back groups, and it is defense. And look, they forced 3 turnovers. They scored 2 touchdowns. The defense alone outscored the Denver Broncos. You had 7 sacks. You had 12 QB hits. The defense did a job in this game, and they beat up Tim Tebow.
My stud, and I'm going to look and see if I've ever picked him this year. I don't know, or in this rewatch. I don't know that I did. I got to go Matthew Stafford because
okay,
that Atlanta game, it's funny because I've always been a Stafford defender from day one. So I also think I genuinely try my hardest to be non-biased. Obviously, everyone's got difficulty with that sometimes, but I watching the Atlanta game, I felt the need to tell friends, like, hey guys, I want you to know, like, as a rewatch, I kind of think we might have overrated Stafford in 2011. Like, he had moments that were exciting, but there were definitely warning signs. And so to go from that to what I watched in Denver was such a big deal because I don't think in this game you could have asked for much more. Like, if Peyton Manning's your quarterback, I don't think things go a whole lot better. If, what was it, 2011? Brett Favre probably wasn't very good anymore, was he? Tom Brady's your quarterback. Drew Brees is your quarterback. Like, I don't think there were very many guys in 2011 who would have had a better game this week than Stafford did. And that's the kind of thing that almost helps. You know, I said I don't think I was wrong to be excited. This game is the kind of game that proves that. And looking back, I believe I had week 2, I had Stafford as the MVP, and it was MVP in week 2. Now we call it the stud. Since then, he has not been the stud, but he has been the dud 4 times now. So that kind of, I think, speaks to how much this game meant to me for Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, he, like we said, he played probably his most complete game. He was really efficient. This was a great way to bounce back from a really horrible game against Atlanta, to go on the road and to play arguably your best game. I love the pass to Titus Young, the first touchdown they score. Titus Young breaks away from everybody standing alone in the end, like legitimately just standing in the middle of the end zone. And Stafford just puts it right in his chest from 41 yards away. Absolutely fantastic. So yeah, no, you're right, man. Stafford played a hell of a game in this one.
All right, wrapping it up, taking a look ahead to next week real quickly. The Lions sit at 6-2 right now, and actually at a bye week after this. So we'll be looking at weeks 10 and 11. A loss in Chicago, a win against the Panthers. The loss against Chicago, you know, we talked about it in the win against Chicago, that on a neutral field, it felt like a game they would have lost. Well, they got blown out by the Bears on the road. And the Panthers game, 49-35 win in week 11, What's interesting about that one for me is up until this point, I remember every single one of these games at some level. You know, some games I remember more than others, but every single game to this point, I have a pretty strong memory of. I don't even remember them playing the Panthers in 2011.
I don't remember that game either, so it'll be fun to go back and watch it. I do remember back when the schedule came out for this particular season, I thought it was interesting that the Lions got to play the Bears twice before they played the Green Bay Packers once. And what I'll always do is when the schedule comes out, I will always go to the very last game of the season
and
to see if they're playing
in Green Bay.
Yeah, if you're playing Green Bay in Green Bay, because I always hate playing in Green Bay in the middle
January.
of December or January.
Yeah.
Yep, hate it.
That's gonna do it for this episode. Look forward to next week. Thanks for listening. This is the Practice Squad presents the Throwback.